Hey guys, welcome to Coffee Time 2. Not much has happened in the world of Warhammer this week, but the one major thing that happened was the Warhammer 40K community survey for the worst unit in the game, done by Innis. So sit back, grab a coffee, and let's go through the worst units in Warhammer. To understand how we came to find the worst units in 40k, we have to understand the top 32 worst units in 40k. So Innis, one of the Team Scotland players, has been running a community survey via Reddit, the competitive 40k page, and lots of other outlets. And he basically had a survey where people could vote for which unit they think is the worst in each codex. Once he amalgamated all of the votes, he basically came to a worst 32 units, the most voted for units that people think are the worst in Warhammer 40k. Do any of these units surprise you? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Once he got there, he took the 32 units and put them out into a knockout duel bracket, where basically you have 16 on 16 until you have one winner from each side, and then they'll fight to the death to become the worst unit in 40k. Each bracket was voted for by the community from 32 down to 16, and then 16 down to 8. The top 8 were also decided via voting with the community, and I managed to chat to Innis himself about why he thinks these units have ended up in the top 8. So in 8th place of the worst unit in 40k is... It's the Servitors. The Servitors are 8th place of the worst unit in 40k, losing out to the Crew Carnivore.
Servitors had the dubious honour of being the single most voted unit in 40k for the initial survey, because they are in something like 6 codexes, and they were top 3 in I think every codex they were an option in. People really don't like Servitors, and it's kind of easy to see why. They don't do anything. If you buy them guns, they hit on 6s if they move, or 5s if they're near a tech marine, maybe 4s if they're near a tech marine and didn't move. But if they're in the open, they're already dead. They don't do anything in combat. They get one attack that hits on 6s. So it's easy to see why people were like, this unit's not great. I think they're wrong. That's a separate conversation. That mostly comes down to the fact that they're cheap and fill slots really well. And they also hold objectives, which for 5 points a model, I don't think you can complain too much at what they are.
Well, that seems to be the only use for a servitor, is something to hold an objective, to fill out a brigade detachment, or to unlock a full-drilled unit such as a Relic Scorpius. And that's what leaves them in number 8. So, 7th place of the worst unit in 40k. Losing out to 60.8% of the vote, in majority of the mutilators being worse, the Venerable Land Raider from the Adeptus Custodes secures his place as 7th worst unit in the game. If you wanted something bright gold, ugly, boxy, and useless in your army for Adeptus Custodes, then this is the unit for you. The problem is with the Land Raider is the same thing with every other Land Raider, is it is overcosted for what it does. It can die too easily to most things in the game, and generally doesn't have enough firepower to make its points back in the end. Yes, it has a few las cannons. Yes, if they roll all damage, then they can kill something quite easily, but there's only 4 shots, which means you're going to miss with one of them, you're going to fail to wound with a couple of them, and then they're going to make the saves with either the last one, or maybe one might get through. Then you have the randomness of rolling damage as well, which means it's just not going to do anything. It does transport stuff, but if you're running foot Custodes, then there's no, as Dennis will say, there's no point in running them. You may as well deep strike them, or they are sitting on an objective at the back, which they don't need a Land Raider for.
So the Venerable Land Raider is a custode unit that's not even good. I realise that's the point of this. For something like 40 points over a regular Land Raider, who they actually got to have a go at in the round of 16, you get +1/+6 skill and a 6-up feel no pain, and you get to not be a Space Marine. The not being a Space Marine is probably the biggest cost that comes with that, because now you have to use custode strats and auras instead of Space Marine ones. You can't have Master Artisans. You don't get like an invulnerable save boost from being custodes. The Caladius exists. I fail to see what the upside is for a Venerable Land Raider. Maybe if you were playing no Forge World and you really, really wanted a couple of las cannons. It's not like custodes can't deep strike to get where they want to be. If you're still playing deploy first, go first, you're playing only rulebook missions from the original rulebook. Still don't run this, but if you are, you might outdrop someone. but you're playing Custodes. You would have anyway.
And for those reasons, that's why the Adeptus Custodes Venerable Land Raider is the 7th worst unit in Warhammer 40k. In 6th place, we have the Plague Surgeon, who managed to fail to be worse than the Demon Host by 59.8%.
So the Plague Surgeon's one of those units that, if I ask you to tell me what it did, you probably can't. Which is why I'm now having to rack my brain. It gets +1 to hit and wound against infantry and bike Adeptus Astartes, and it gives you a reroll 1s or on Disgusting Resilience, which is a increase of 3% of how many wounds you save. So you go from 33% to saving like 38%. It's ridiculous. The guy is utterly trash. He doesn't have a combat weapon. He's attacking with like poking you. Maybe he's AP2. No one cares. He doesn't make you meaningfully more resilient. He's also making Plague Marines more resilient, and Plague Marines also suck. I don't get it. Why bother?
The fact that the Plague Surgeon's ability is basically reroll 1s for Disgusting Resilient, and as it is said, it's only 3% increase. This ability is also only 3 inches, so your infantry units would have to conga line to someone who already moves really slow, and most of your army moves really slow already. You really want to be up in the grill with Plague Marines, etc., because they're a combat-based unit more realistically. So you just by using this unit, you're actually slowing yourself down, so you're more likely to get shot, which means you're going to be taking saves even more. You're better spending your points on something else that's more useful. It also drops into the elite slot, which is quite a premium for Death Guard Codex, competing with Foul Blight Spawns and other more useful characters and even units such as Blight Lord, Terminators, and Death Shroud. So I suggest if you're planning on running a Plague Surgeon is to not and use those points on something else more useful. So the final unit to miss out on getting to the semi-finals, it's the Necron Monolith. The Obelisk is marginally worse according to the community, and that was voted 62.9% in favour of being worse than the Monolith. So obviously one of the most recognisable Necron units, but maybe even one of the most recognisable 40k units. The Necron Monolith is voted 5th worst unit in the game for the following reasons. 1, it's humongous, which makes it slow. 2, it has a bad save and no invulnerable. And 3, its shooting is mediocre at best.
Okay, can we start with why it's good? So when you charge it on a 4+, it does D6 mortal wounds to you, as long as you're not a monster vehicle, you know, the things that are going to be charging monoliths. It flies, which means that you can like get it up on top of buildings, where it will crush them under its bulk, thereby asserting dominance. It can deep strike as long as you've got a spare 2x2 to deploy it in, because it has to go 12 inches away, which also means it can't be Auspex scanned when it deep strikes. You can deploy units in it, and when it dies, they also die, saving you the effort of rolling saves. It's movement 6, and it degrades, but only to movement 4, so you're not losing that much.
Why is it 12 inches? Why is the deep strike? The Obelisk is the same, but why is it 12 inches?
It's just so big that you can see it coming and you've got time to run away. Like, you could have like 5 Assault Centurions or this.
Yeah.
You can have 2 Catan or this. And I mean, only one of them is very, very deadly when you throw it. And it's not the Monolith, it's the Metal Catan.
So now we're down into the semi-finals to the final 4. So in 4th place, it's the Kroot Carnivore. Arguably not the worst Kroot in the Codex, but they lose out to the Demon Host by nearly 80% of the votes.
They have the small honor of being troops in the Tau army, which actually has pretty good troops. So by comparison, Kroot don't have a lot of synergy with how Tau play. They're doing things like advanced deploying, which just means they get wrapped. They're low armor save in an army that wants to be defending itself with things like drones or hiding out line of sight. And they're just less damaging than something like Fire Warriors or Breachers, which both do an actual role in things you want. So in another army, Kroot might be good, but specifically in Tau, Kroot suffer from just not synergizing with how the army wants to play. They're very easily wrappable. They don't do anything defensively for you. They've got a couple of nice stratagems with things like heroic intervention, but they don't do anything in combat. There's not really a reason to take them unless you specifically need to be able to push people back from being able to charge you, which isn't really Tau's problem anyway, because you can't wrap them. So they just don't fill a role within Tau, really.
Your points for a Tau army for troop units are better spent on mass fire warriors. The fact that they have better guns, they kind of fill the same role. That yes, they don't get the infiltrating move or the heroic intervention, but again, that's not really what you want to do. You want small units that are going to hold objectives and block out charges, which fire warriors can do, whilst also being able to shoot, along with more synergy with the stratagems that you have available. So with just 3 units left, it's still all to play for. And in third place, the worst unit in Warhammer 40k, it's the Mutilators from Chaos Space Marines. They lose out to the Obelisk with 69%.
Nice.
So what do you get when you take an Assault Centurion, shrink it, and then also leave it in your Detol for 6 to 10 years? You get the Mutilator, which is maybe okay if you run 3 of them, sink 10 CP into them, and are also playing specifically Emperor's Children, where they can make their charge. Or you could just spend all of that on a unit that's good already and do more. Do you know how randomness is the epitome of how everything great in 40k works?
Oh yeah.
You want to have random strength, random AP, random damage. You want to make sure that when you roll that 1 for damage, your opponent knows that you're flexing and you didn't need it. So that's what Mutilators do for you. They allow you to not make combat, to not need to roll those random stats. Because if you roll them, you can be disheartened, and if you're disheartened in a game of 40k, you might play worse. If you just can't make combat to roll for the random stats, they'll keep your spirits high, and that way you'll win more. You could win even more by not bringing them, but where's the fun in that? They're just such lovely models, you want to get the use out of them.
The same concept of the Obliterators, but in combat just makes them overall worse. The fact that you've got to get them there, and then when you do get there, depending what you charge, you don't know what your profile is. It just makes them so unreliable. And also, if you fail the charge, they are just super duper slow. I'm pretty sure these units are one of the ugliest units in 40k. Really not standing the test of time against the Obliterators, and even so, they came out later than the original Obliterators and look worse. So here we are with the final 2 units voted by the community. One of these is the worst unit in 40k. The other is the runner-up. So in second place, it's the Demon Host. The Demon Host is the second worst unit in Warhammer 40k according to the community. The Obelisk smashing it with 87.8% of the vote to be the worst unit in the game.
So the Demon Host. Now I actually personally have a lot of affection for the Demon Host. Team Scotland as a whole has done very well with the Demon Host. It's carried us to many victories. It's a 25-point character that is a demon, so if you're really worried about Grey Knights killing you, you can stand this at the front and they'll do it faster. Because Imperium is lacking demons by and large, so maybe you'll bait them into being in the tide of smiting with extra damage so they can kill it in one go. If you take it in your Inquisition detachment, it breaks Doctrines, where you could just bring an Inquisitor on his own and not break Doctrines. So if you don't want AP, you're scared of AP for some reason, and you don't want any AP on your bolters, bring a Demon Host. He will fix that problem for you. He gets to randomly roll at a table to see if he gets to get wounds back, fly, or do mortal wounds, because sometimes you just need a smite that goes off 1/3 of the time instead of like 80% of the time like a regular smite. And if he's lost 2 of his 3 wounds, he gets them both back. No rolling required, just gets them back.
That is strong.
He's also a fly screen exactly 1/3 of the time. So if you're worried about getting wrapped by a very offensive combat army, 1/3 of the time with the Demon Host, you're okay. And for an army like Guard that doesn't have access to fly, 1/3 of the time is better than none of the time. So what I'm hearing is you guys should be running Demon Hosts in your Guard armies to screen for Centurions, because they can't be wrapped 1/3 of the time.
Everyone should run Demon Hosts because they're useful 1/3 of the time.
Guard can never screen for Centurions. Demon Hosts, 1/3 of the time. Command reroll, 55% of the time. That's better than half chance that you don't just immediately lose to Centurions if you screen with Demon Hosts.
That is very true.
No, it's not.
As Innes has rightfully said, these units, whilst only being 25 points, they literally do nothing for your army. Narratively, they're absolutely awesome, but if you're playing any sort of game where you want a chance of winning, then do not include a Demon Host. It's just a waste of points and time of painting, and it's in Finecast, so you don't even want to be messing around with that. It's not exactly the nicest looking model, and it also does nothing on the table except for randomly flies and randomly does more wounds here and there. So as Innes said, just don't bother. Just run something else, please. 25 points is nearly the same points as an infantry squad for Astra Militarum, which has a third more wounds and does more on the table than this will. With the Demon Host securing second place, that leaves only the Obelisk coming all the way from the 31st bracket to be the worst unit in 40k according to the community. Whilst being a massive iconic unit, being a Lord of War and being so expensive, sadly the Obelisk is just so overpointed for the amount of output it has and the amount of functionality it has on the table. With only 20 strength 7 shots that may explode and a slow movement of 8 inches, along with the same issue that the Monolith has where it can only deep strike more than 12 inches away. The only thing that it has going for it really is the gravity pulse ability, but that only seems to trigger on a 6 against fly units within 18, which means it can be obviously outmaneuvered with it being so slow, and it's so expensive for this to only go off 1 in 6 times. Why is it
Obelisk the Tormentor from Yu-Gi-Oh! Is notorious for being an Egyptian god card who is incredibly powerful. The Obelisk from 40k is about as useful as Obelisk the Tormentor is in a game of 40k, which is to say, not at all. So for when you've always wanted to emulate the Hive Tyrant of early 8th edition with 24 shots with no AP, who was 190 points and far more useful, you could buy an Obelisk. You get a point of toughness, you lose the invulnerable save, your movement drops significantly, and if you roll 6s a lot, you do mortal wounds to things with fly. But it does have a much bigger flying stand, which means that if it falls over and crushes your opponent's models, it's going to do a lot more damage. It's Titanic, just in case you were worried about macro weapons not having targets. Now they'll be firing at this instead of your stuff with quantum shielding.
I mean, it does blow up 2d6 with d6 with mortal wounds, so...
But unfortunately, it's movement 8, so it's going to be stood in your army when it does that. This unit is actively a detriment to your army if you run it, but it does get doctrine benefits, so you could make it Mephrit and have an entire point of AP. It doesn't measure to the hull, you measure to the base on an Obelisk.
You're kidding.
No, you measure to the base. Think about how much like wobbly model syndrome you could create with this. You can fit that between 2 ruins completely legally, and then just like have it floating in the sky above them.
Oh my
and then your opponent's models can't go through there. That's your space.
Why don't you measure to the model?
I don't think you measure to the model on the Tesseract Vault either, by the way. It's like a new ITC behind enemy lines is really great now, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you drop these guys into your opponent's backfield, like your opponent leaves space, and you manage to get them like lining your opponent's board edge, they're not going to go near the deployment zone in case they knock them off. If that Tesseract Vault bit on the Necron Codex page was also Obelisk rules, it'd still not be good.
So there you go, guys. The winner of the bracket was the Necron Obelisk, coming all the way from the 31st seed, with the path defeating the Stomper, Pyrovores, the Monolith, which it actually defeated in the initial voting survey, and then the Mutilators and the Demon Host for its ultimate victory as the worst unit in Warhammer 40k. I'd love to hear what you guys think in the comments, what units you think are bad or what you think are the worst units in Warhammer. Obviously this was a survey done by Innis, so massive shout out to him. It was really cool to be able to have a chat to him why he thinks these units are really bad as well. So make sure you do give him a follow on Twitter. I'll leave a link in the description. Otherwise guys, thank you very much for watching and we'll catch you next time.